All right, welcome everyone. Welcome to this week's episode of Lean in Olympia. My name is Corey Passons. I'm the program manager for Interfaith Relations with Interfaith Works. Interfaith Works is a social justice nonprofit in Thurston County that is a coalition of churches, and we're also the region's largest service provider to vulnerable adults experiencing homelessness. I want to welcome you to Lean in Olympia. This is a webcast show. It features conversations at the crossroads of humanity, justice, and belief, and other topics too, as we've grown in our spectrum of ranges of guests and topics. If you want to check out past episodes, stay up to date with the work that Interfaith Works is doing, check us out on the website at interfaith-works.org. And when you go to that website, you can find our Facebook page, our YouTube channel, and just keep up to date because we have a lot of exciting projects coming to fruition in December with our 2828 Martin Way project. And the next episode will be on August 24th with Meg Martin, who's the Executive Director of Interfaith Works. So today I'm pleased to welcome our guest, Rabbi Seth Goldstein. Hello.
Hey, Corey, how are you?
Good. Glad that you're here. Really
glad to be here.
Happy that you're here. Rabbi Seth is the rabbi at Temple Beth Hafilo. You've been here since 2003, and that when you came, the temple was located down the road at 8th and Jefferson. Yeah?
Right, yeah, just for my first year.
One year, and then the temple moved to its current location up the street. And Rabbi Goldstein is the author of numerous published articles, essays, and liturgies. He writes regularly on his blog, Rabbi 360, and Rabbi _, right?
Well, the blog is Rabbi 360.
Okay.
The underscore comes in certain other social media.
Okay. Which we'll get into. He's produced a weekly podcast, Torah, TL, semicolon, DR, too long to read. Yeah. And a web series, Carpooling with Rabbi. And then most recently, he creates Jewish content on TikTok. And we'll chat about that too. So welcome.
All right. Thank you. Yeah, it's great to be here.
How are you doing today?
Doing well. It's nice out. We're getting closer to the high holidays, so I'm getting a little more, that's where my mind's going these days, so.
That's going right up. I was going to appreciate you taking time today to meet with us, and maybe we'll talk about that and what kind of preparations happen for you. Only for Interfaith Works. Yeah, we should mention that Temple Beth Hafilo is a longtime member of the Interfaith Works Coalition and just a deep contributor to the life and vitality of Interfaith Works. So we really cherish the partnership with Temple.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and I think it's an important part of what we do, or our sort of spiritual mission, as it were, to be involved with the greater community outside the Jewish community and especially interfaith community.
Great. We talked yesterday. I was going to ask you if you would share with us your part of your story. You can begin wherever you want, but what I'm also curious to know is how you came to become a rabbi, and I'd like to ask some questions around that. And so if you could share with us your story, and then we'll move toward that. I'd love to hear more about it.
Yeah, great. I guess if I can go back as far as I don't know. Well, today's my parents' anniversary, so that's I guess a starting point for my story. But no, I came to the path to the rabbinate wasn't a direct one necessarily for me, although I'm originally from the New York area, New York metropolitan area, and grew up in a very Jewishly identified community, and my family was very connected with our Jewish community. And so I grew up with a very strong sense of connection to family, community, tradition, history as a Jewish person, and was engaged with my congregation. My parents were engaged with our congregation, and so went up through religious education and involved in youth group and whatnot. And then when I left home to go off to college, I sort of entered into, I guess, a period of number of years where I would sort of swing back and forth, as it were, between connection to community or not. It varied over the years. When I was at college, I was sometimes not engaged, sometimes was, then later on. Never was much of a spiritual seeker in the sense of seeking outside of Judaism, but it was more of like, I guess, the outskirts of the center around Judaism and my own Jewish identity. And then as an adult, after I worked in a variety of different fields, and most recently journalism, I I really wanted to give more attention to that and to study Judaism with more intention.
Where are we in your life at that point? What, like, roughly what age are you moving
12.
towards that?
No, I think that's right. No, this was like post college. So in my early 20s, I guess.
Okay, yeah.
And thought that I again wanted to explore Judaism more, and so I ended up enrolling in a master's program actually in Jewish studies, with the thinking that I wanted to engage more deeply on an academic level and maybe wind up teaching and whatnot. And but it was kind of through that experience that I thought more about what I wanted to do with my own sense of Jewish identity, with the Jewish knowledge that I was gaining, and ended up having a number of experiences during that time, both with my own personal Jewish growth. My graduate program was also connected to a rabbinic program, so I was engaging with rabbinical students. My wife, who is also a rabbi, had begun rabbinical training prior to my beginning, so while I was engaging in graduate studies, so I got to see the work that she was doing. And a friend of mine who was not Jewish just invited me to participate in his wedding, and that was just a very powerful moment for me as well. So adding up these different experiences drew me to what I really wanted to do with my sense of Jewish identity and Jewish knowledge, is to really bring that to others and to work to build Jewish community. And I thought that the rabbinate would be a really good way to do that, without even knowing in which where I wanted to work as a rabbi. It was sort of unclear if I was going to end up in a congregation or not when I started rabbinical school. But I knew that I wanted to work within Jewish community to build Jewish identity and connection to the traditions and community that I experienced.
I appreciate that part of your path was moving into kind of having a spiral of deep connection and then maybe tangential connection. I think that a lot of people maybe will relate to that, or you could relate to a lot of people from that experience yourself, of not just being, funneled through, tradition and emerging this like strident leader that's never doubted or anything like that. Like I appreciate that about your journey. And a little later, I'd like to talk about, postmodern spirituality or just Pacific Northwest spirituality. And I really feel like that's an arc that many people go through in their own sense of connection.
Yeah, I think it should. I want to be able to validate that for people in terms of that, because sometimes people feel almost apologetic or guilty that they haven't been on this straight trajectory, right? At least within the circles that I work, Jewish circles. And so I want to be able to validate that it's always a journey, and the journey isn't always a straight line. Right? It can be spiraling. I appreciate that image, and that there are sometimes we draw closer or draw apart depending on where we are, and that's part of it.
When you think back on your path towards becoming a rabbi, are there people in your lives, mentors, teachers, that you look back on and think this person was an inspiration? You mentioned Johanna, actually, as someone who's very close in your life. Are there people were there rabbis that you had in your childhood or even in college that you look back on as inspirations, or other people who weren't rabbis that inspired you toward this affirmation?
Yeah, I think back. I mean, Johanna is a big one. It continues to be, and she grew up in a rabbinic family. Her father, Zichrono Livracha, was a rabbi, and so he sort of had that inspiration, and sort of secondarily to me to sort of understand what that was all about. Because I grew up with very inspirational rabbis. I had two rabbis through my childhood that I, leading up through bar mitzvah and then into my teen years, who I learned a lot from and respected. And in some ways, it was they were mentors in a way. Thinking back, that it also made it somewhat difficult to move into the rabbinate, because I thought, well, I really admire them. I don't know if I could do that. I don't know if I could lead a community like that or be that present for people. And so it was a part of discovery of that. And I think that, and also the rabbi I had during my college years. And I think that it's interesting when we think about mentors, is that we sometimes don't even realize there are mentors until years later, when things kind of sink in, or we find ourselves in a different place and we're able to sort of reflect back, or we get to a certain place on our journey and be like, wow, how did I get here? It's like, oh, actually they were telling me about this, and I maybe not consciously or whatever. So I think it was accumulation of all those different experiences that I drew from and continue to draw from. And then different teachers in rabbinical school, and and sometimes people could be mentors in a very specific way, but and I like to think that we're always learning, so there's always opportunities for mentorship and to learn from those, not only who are my teachers, but also who are my students and my congregants now, and to be able to learn how to live into this role more.
I love that we're thinking about the people who didn't position themselves as mentors, but later on that energy comes, or that wisdom from them comes. And I also think about people who might have told, like, I will be, you will remember me for this. And you're like, maybe you do, but like, so you finish rabbinical school. Was the next stop Olympia?
Next stop Olympia, yeah.
Okay. So
which was 2003,
right out of school. So you're here. It's an established congregation. I think it was formed, I'm sorry, I didn't look this up, but from previous classes I've taken, it was early 19th century. Isn't that true?
Yeah, it was like 20th century.
Well, sorry, yeah, 1900s. Early 1900s.
Yeah, it was the 30s. It was in the 30s.
Yeah.
Well, but even though the congregation had been around, I'm only the second full-time rabbi that the congregation
I did
has
not
had, just because of
that.
the growth. And yeah, that was a big change in a lot of ways. One, because I was born and bred on the East Coast, and so moving to the Northwest was a big change. A very welcome change, and I love it out here. But it's just a different change, and or different experience. And also moving into a congregation, because one of the interesting things about my experience during rabbinical school was, as I mentioned, I wasn't sure where I would end up when I entered rabbinical school. But as I was going through seminary, I ended up doing most of my internships and work on college campuses with college students. And actually, I thought that's where I was going to wind up, and to be working on college campuses. And that didn't work out here. So then it was like a year. It was just kind of. So I actually came out to. I can say this after 18 years in that I had no congregational experience before I started the pulpit here. Which is great, and it's funny, I think.
So what, maybe in your first year, what was one of the biggest surprises about being in a congregation or being a rabbi amongst human beings in a community? Like what was a surprise?
I think it's like I think, and I've shared this with people who I know who are students now or whatnot. I think that you really start to learn. Like seminary begins the day seminary ends, right? You begin to learn what it means to be a rabbi or spiritual leader just when you're finished with school and you're sort of in the thick of it. It's probably the same for other professionals, doctors, and I think that when you're beyond that support of the institution, of the learning institution, and you are the person, right? The responsible person for all of it, I think it's a great learning opportunity, and which can be exciting and anxiety producing and scary at the same time. And knowing too that the academics provided a foundation, the learning provided a foundation, but ultimately you're continually learning new things, always coming up with, even still now 2 decades in, and still having new experiences and new opportunities. And we didn't learn pandemic planning in rabbinical school, for example. And so, but then realizing too that so much of it, regardless of where you're working, is based on the same thing, and that's just authentic human relationships and being able to develop relationships with people and build on those. And so while there's, which is beyond any technical skill of running a congregation. So yeah, just keep and just being able to keep that sense of humility, of being able to say I don't know, or I need to learn this, and to be continually learning, I think is part of. So I'm still surprised, I guess. Is what I'm saying. I think it's always something new.
Yeah, I mean, I met you about 5 years ago when I moved to Olympia, coming out of a seminary myself at a later stage in life, and I serve an interfaith community here as my other position in Olympia. And I remember a couple years in, looking at my bookshelf and seeing some of the books from seminary and thinking, some of these are actually impediments, to what I'm trying to do in my work, and some of these are holding me in a frame that's not allowing me to experience that full humanity that's coming at me, and so I remember having a book purge, and then new books of, the wisdom of people around, and just that constant surprise. One of the iterations of the word surprise is joy, and for me, it's been a joy to receive the humanity that comes from being in ministry. So I relate to that. I wanted to just for a minute celebrate Temple Beth Hafilo. Temple Beth Hafilo is a welcoming congregation. Personally, I've taken classes there from you. The services are open for people to come and to experience them, including the high holidays. I've felt welcomed. Some of those very sacred spaces in Jewish life at Temple Beth Hafilo. You have a quote. Now I don't remember if this is from Rabbi 360 or the website, but it's you.
It's me. Okay.
It's you. So I am both committed to creating vibrant Jewish community and using a spiritual voice to speak to issues of social justice and common concern. And I just want to testify. I've experienced you as a person who's committed to public and social engagement and this creating of vibrant Jewish community. And so one of the questions I had for you is, so if we have a pie chart, and we're looking at it, what percentage of that is like the community building Rabbi Seth of like, I do it because I love it. This is a part of me. This is who I am. And what percentage might be like, my tradition urges me toward building community?
Yeah, interesting. That's a great question. I thought about that. That is my quote. Yeah, I did write that in a bio somewhere. Because I think that, what's interesting, going back to what drew me, the social justice piece almost came a little bit later. I can't say that I was drawn to the rabbinate to do the work of social justice. That's not what my initial draw was. My initial draw was sort of deepen people's connection to Judaism and spirituality. But through that engagement is where the learning that a fundamental piece, I believe, of what it means to be Jewish and what our tradition teaches is this notion of extending beyond ourselves and doing the work that we need to do in the world through we have the notion of tikkun olam, of repair of the world, that the world is different mystical teachings talk about how there's a fundamental brokenness in the world and that it's on us to repair that, and that has become understood, maybe not initially in its initial mystical connotation, but understand in a kind of social justice way that this is that when we define what's broken in our world, that can mean different things, and depending on our local community or greater community. But there is a sense that we can repair, and I think that very much calls us to act in a social justice way. I think that the my undergrad, when I was in undergraduate, I majored in government or political science. So I was always kind of had this interest in government and society and how we form societies. And I actually studied political theory as an undergraduate, just this idea of what makes an ideal community. And I found a natural fit between that and Judaism as an expression of that. And I think Judaism very much teaches this notion of not an exclusive sense of individual salvation or redemption, to use a theological terminology, but of a communal one, that we're meant to have. We are obligated to one another. We have our responsibilities to our neighbors, and how we define that is broad. So I think it's deeply ingrained in Judaism, and to be in a place and serve in a community that I think embodies that as well, just in who is in this community is a great fit, and to be able to work on that together. So I think I wouldn't say it's me. I think it's sort of me embodying the tradition and how I interpret the tradition, and bringing how others interpret the tradition as well.
Well, this is one of the gifts of tradition itself, is that it helps us expand. Without that prompt or that urge and that model from a tradition, we might not reach a fullness, or more of a fullness as humans.
Right.
So this is a gift that you're naming, of kind of this urging from the tradition of something that might not be native or innate in a person. They can become expanded through the prompting of that tradition. That's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, that's why I one of the values I find for me personally within Judaism is just that the fact that we are oriented around sacred text, right? So the Torah and then its extended commentaries, that we are that part of our spiritual life is engaging with text, and to be able to be in a dialogue with this ancient text, and yet still find relevance in it. And I find that's to be a real power. That's something that connects us to the past and gives us an orientation and a definition and a meeting with our different values that we might draw from a variety of other sources, but that we are grounded in a specific tradition that then allows us to pursue these other things, that it is sort of rooted. There's a rootedness to it.
You and I have talked a bit about, you referenced it in your own journey of having this, a movement, kind of a moving away and back toward a gravity with the tradition itself. And I know that, part of ministry is a healing, being a part of healing. And you mentioned Tikkun Olam. That's a healing or repair, but you also mentioned that we be extended to others, like a healing of the spiritual lives as well. And I know in my own tradition, which is Christian, part of my own personal path have been receiving, translations or different iterations of the tradition that have later on in my life, when wisdoms and truths began to emerge, there was conflict. There was even pain, because some of the teachings I couldn't resonate them, and they didn't service me, and they were actually teachings that brought pain to me because of the way that they reflected on humanity, for example. So some of the work that I've encountered is being with people who've been, the right word is wounded in a tradition. And I just wonder if that's been a part of your own path of being present with people and being available for them in those journeys of their own lives.
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I think about my own journey as well. Part of that journey that I didn't get into involved sort of a shifting in identification with denominations within Judaism, to what at the time was a more progressive direction. And it was hard because, especially if that's where you're rooted and that's your introduction, right, to be able to move that way. And I think that I do encounter that with people who were experienced Judaism in a particular way that was challenging, or didn't fit, or they found themselves in a different place. And I think that part of the role I play, or try to play, a message I try to extend, is that Judaism itself is very flexible, expandable within that, and that there are multiple ways to find expression, and that it's about the seeking. I mean, sometimes it gets, and I don't know if this will get too far afield, but I think that sometimes we run into issues, at least within Judaism, and I'm sure within other faith traditions, where you have, the spirit, the religiosity, the spirituality, and then you have the institutions that are meant to hold them. Yeah. And they don't always match up, right? Yeah. Or the institutions aren't functioning in the right way to really get at the deeper questions of the deeper spirit. And that's a challenge. And sometimes institutions are much slower to keep up with. And that's sort of why I dabble in social media to sort of think about what are different ways we can send messages of spirituality, and really there's somewhat universal questions that at least in my framework I see through a Jewish lens, but using different ways and how we meeting people where they are essentially. And I think that's really the onus on us, as spiritual leaders, to really try to meet people where they are, and to not necessarily move people to conform to a particular institution, but to really address what are those basic human needs and questions and spiritual, and sort of have that dialogue.
Yeah, because I mean, you and I have talked about how got a little parade going on here.
Yeah, that's right. That's basic.
We've talked about yesterday we were talking about, I was sharing with you a concept of the human as being a spiritually eager, hunger, curious, and culture is a much more fasting adaptation. It adapts and changes much more faster than I think the human does themselves. I mean, we are connected with our ancestors through our basic, yearning for meaning and community and connectivity. And yet, as culture emerges and evolves, sometimes meaning and connectivity can be refracted through this postmodern lens that can be very, disorienting in the myriad of different choices of where to find meaning or how to interpret it. And yet, in that conversation are these durable traditions, these durable religious traditions. Yet, they have to speak. They have to speak in what's happening right now.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, your TikTok account, I mean, really is doing exactly that.
Trying to. Thank you.
No, I think it is. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's right. I think that's how do we creatively, because they're timeless questions, right? They're not exclusive to a particular age or medium or what have you. And I think that I think the onus is on Jewish, not just for our faith leaders to sort of engage with that and sort of see. That's the sort of meeting people. What are the ways we want to get the message across? How are people ingesting information, right, among these myriad of choices? And how can we provide an avenue? That's why, into an ancient tradition, but in a new way. And I don't feel I'm changing anything. I don't think I'm cheapening anything. I think it's just how people digest things, for better or worse in a way. But I like to think of it as value add and exploring, and it's not. I don't think that congregations, community. I mean, we still need those, right? We desperately need connections to community, congregations where we could really show up and be seen, see and be seen. But those other ways of hearing those messages, of doing that learning, they're in constant flux, and I think we need to meet the moment, and I think it's good for us too as faith. I mean, I'm not just doing it because I feel this is what I need to do to reach people. I'm having fun with it, and it's been a great creative outlook, and so it keeps it vibrant for me as well to sort of think about how could we move that message, take this ancient message, which I still love, written on a scroll, within Judaism, but yet sort of send it out in different ways.
Like seeing tradition as being alive, evolving versus fixed. And
exactly.
And you well, each person really in your congregation or elsewhere being a part of that. Being a part of that, the construction of the tradition again and again and again, over and over and over again. Yeah, and if there's, if the comments on the posts are any indication, there's a lot of people who are seeking out there. A lot of people who are appreciative of the ability to connect with spirituality in a way that makes sense to them, and that there's a lot of desire for that. There's a lot of desire for it. It's not, TikTok's not just the dances. I wouldn't be on it if it was, but but there's a lot of questioning and information and interest in spirituality, which is really interesting, exciting to see. Oh, so well, we were talking about some of the TikToks earlier, but I didn't look at some of the comments. So there's like you have active dialogues going on with these.
Well,
and people
I am terrible at keeping up with the comments.
But you're seeing people respond in ways that say,
yeah, people respond to both Jews who are, see their tradition in a new way or validated. People who are interested in Judaism, I've seen. And just people who are interested in spirituality, who appreciate learning more, or just want to learn more, just in general about Judaism. A lot of my posts are less about, I guess they're sort of more generic spirituality through a Jewish lens. I do less about what is this, or what is this holiday, or what is this object. I do some of that, but it's more like, what's the spiritual teaching from this week's Torah portion, or what is the spiritual teaching from this season that we're in right now, leading up to the high holidays, and which I think are Jewish but also universal in a way. So it's been really nice to see that feedback. Oh, now there's pressure to keep it up.
It's because you moved from the east, the East Coast, to the Pacific Northwest, and the Pacific Northwest is the most unaffiliated religiously region of the United States by far, and talked about as the Nun, None, the Nun Zone. And so I wonder about, maybe, do you think you've been influenced by this unaffiliated spirituality that exists here, that's real and vibrant and curious and hungry, and do you think that that's influenced your formation in any way?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think one of the things that drew me to Olympia was, I grew up in the New York area, as I mentioned, which was very Jewish, right? There are a lot of Jews in New York, if you didn't know that already.
Proper bagels are there.
Yeah, exactly. Miss the bagels. But so when I grew up, it was there was a lot of Jewish culture around. It was in the ether, as it were. And yes, I went to synagogue, and we were connected with a congregation, but I knew people who weren't. But still very Jewish, right? And moving out to the Northwest is not just low affiliation rates across all religious communities, but also smaller Jewish community as well. And yet, when I came out here, because I came out here as a student first, in my last year of seminary, because the congregation had been through an interim period and they brought out rabbinical students.
Oh, okay.
And I ended up coming for the high holidays of all times, because it was the biggest time of the year. And I was just really drawn and moved to this community, and moved by this community, because it wasn't the same way. It wasn't that, oh, you're Jewish in New York, because that everybody should, because it's in the ether. It was much more intentional. And so everyone who was there in that room at the high holidays was there because they wanted to be there, and they were making an affirmative statement of their connection. And that was really moving to me. I was like, wow, I want to be a part of this community, where it's just not, it's there, but you have to make it. And so that's part of it as well. That's, I guess, part of the Northwest, I think, because I think that the lower affiliation, but yeah, also still people feel a draw, and that's where it comes to, well, for me, where it's a lot about relationship, relationship with people who are in the congregation, who are in the greater community, who aren't maybe affiliated at the moment, but yet I still have a relationship with them, and also being able to think more broadly, I think. Well, two more things. Well, think more broadly about spirituality, because even those who are unaffiliated, as you said, are deeply spiritual and have the questions, have the inquiries, make meaning in their own ways, create holidays, create events, create ritual. And so that's happening, even if they're not affiliated. And the other two is the social justice piece. I think that the social justice as an expression of spirituality is something I learned since being out here, and I think that it is very much an expression of spirituality. It's not just something that, because it's drawn from faith community, and it's done as faith community, and text talks about it. I mean, there are people who might not be religious, you know, who show up on the Sabbath or do other things, but find the work of social justice to be an important part of their identity. That to me is a spiritual expression. So it's in some ways sort of expanding what that means, you know, what spirituality means, and which is great because it allows us to be more creative, I guess.
Yeah, as a leader, as an observer of people, to see that creativity, even to, I mean, I see you promoting it, you know, through TikTok and other expressions that have come up very recently, you know, and probably pandemic probably was a big part of what brought you to that. Is that true?
The TikTok?
Yeah. Is that true? Okay, so finding a creative response.
Yeah.
To like a almost impossible situation to meet with people and.
Well, and also to give
connect.
people a different identity. You know, I think there's a lot of assumption too that comes with. I'm gonna guess, and I haven't done the studies, but I know the books have been written, that some of that disaffiliation or unaffiliation has to do with various assumptions, which I don't think are necessarily true. You know, assumptions about what spiritual communities are, or what happens within the walls of a church or synagogue or mosque, or the attitudes of religious leaders. And I think those assumptions, because they might be coming from other places or past experiences, or, you know, you never advanced in your spirituality since being a teenager, and adult spirituality, you know, is much different. So yet to be able to give the message that that's not what Jewish community, that's not what spiritual community is. A Jewish community really does. I mean, there's always going to be disconnects. Not everybody. I'm not trying to get every unaffiliated, but to send the message that no, we actually, our values are aligned. This is what we think. This is what we do. This is what I think. This is what I do. So just not saying, okay, now join the synagogue or come to the synagogue, but just letting you know that, you know, we have to, I think, dispel those assumptions, not by being inauthentic. I'm being purely authentic in what I'm putting out there, but just to offer that narrative for people.
Yeah.
That this is what spiritual community is for me at this moment, and it might not be the one you experienced 10, 15, 20 years ago, because we evolve and change, as you mentioned already.
Yeah. Some of the trainings that people receive from various traditions can suddenly, over time, you know, it's like suddenly your car's, you know, 20 years old, and you're looking at it going, this isn't servicing me, you know, the way that I remember it when I encountered it. And like, I'm different, you know, and maybe the car's in the garage and it's the same, but you're still different, you know, and you've experienced the world in a different way. So progressive or liberal communities, which Temple Beth uses both of those words, I think, in their descriptions, they meet spirituality from this perspective of holding the tradition in a certain way.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I think we always start from a place of tradition, but I mean, within Judaism, a lot of the distinction between what might identify a more liberal community versus a more traditional or Orthodox community has to do with issues of not just theology, but Jewish expression, and how Judaism is observed both in ritual and practice. And so more traditional expression would be more small c conservative, in the sense of that there's a body of Jewish law, we use that term, that dictates certain observances, and more liberal communities will look at that as a starting point, and rooted in it, not completely discounting it, but finding a different place within it. So whereas, you know, a traditional expression of kashrut, the dietary laws, you know, is somewhat very specific, and there are different levels of how strict one might observe those. You know, a liberal approach would honor those, and you know, we're not going to say pork is kosher now, but you know, we have just a different approach, a more liberal approach to thinking, maybe more holistically about sacred eating, or how we observe, or a more traditional person might not eat in a restaurant. Someone might. So I mean, I don't want to get too into the weeds, but yeah, that's sort of where we are. So a more expansive and creative approach, but yet still rooted in the tradition.
Yeah, and so when we talk about a creative approach and Judaism as a spirituality that's an ongoing, emerging thing. We also recently talked about some of the ways that Judaism, and I didn't use this word yesterday, but I'm going to now, has been a blessing. Let me keep going here, then a blessing as an expression through the lives of people who have become leaders in the West for expressions of Buddhism. Like in the Insight tradition and Buddhist tradition. We were talking about some names yesterday, like Joan Kabat-Zinn, Tara Brach, Jack Kornfield, Sylvia Bornstein. There are others. We could fill out this list more. And as we were talking about them yesterday, and as we're talking about spirituality being an ongoing commitment of authentic expression, that has found those people have an orientation in their lives, or at least an upbringing, and yet they've also found a new wholeness in this tradition. I was wondering, a question I had for you is, do you think that their Jewish heritage has served them in some capacity to live into new expressions of their spiritual lives?
It's a great question. A lot of Jewish Buddhists out there. I mean, I think that I don't know. I mean, it's a great question, because I think it's a great example of the fact that people, and I obviously can't speak for them, but I think that, what I said earlier about sometimes maybe the institutions or at some point maybe failed the spirituality more, and I don't know about their specific Jewish upbringing, but clearly they had spiritual drives and desires that were not being met by Judaism. And wondering if they were met by different teachers, or because a lot of, I think, what is being expressed can be found within Judaism, specifically within the mystical tradition and other things. So whether that's the case, not saying that like, oh, why didn't they stay Jewish type thing, but I'm just curious about that piece of it. But knowing too, in the past decade, 2 decades, 3 decades, that has really expanded within Jewish community notions of those type of expressions, meditation, mindfulness, that you find within that. And so that's expanding, maybe in reaction to, or just in the natural course of things. And I don't know, I think that there's probably more of and also too, I say that Judaism doesn't exist in a vacuum. Tradition does. So we've definitely incorporated elements of, as Buddhism has become more popularized perhaps, or established within the U.S., has incorporated some of those ideas as well. So maybe roots of it might be found within Judaism, but certain expressions of it are found within Buddhism and brought in. And probably just with Buddhism that there's getting back to the roots question, might not have found it within Christianity, because if they were seeking that way, because of there's more of a fitting between Buddhism and Judaism. Judaism, I said even there, right there. Buddhism and Judaism, that there might not have been within Judaism and Christianity. So finding it that way. But yeah, it's a great question. But I think just as a reminder about how these spiritual questions are so important to all of us.
And I love how you said that the traditions don't exist in a vacuum. And like one parallel example from the Christian side is the emergence of centering prayer, which is a contemplative expression rooted in the Christian tradition. But the monks who were developing it salvaged from, the cloud of unknowing, back in the 14th century from an unknown monk in the British Isles, which is talking about this insight meditation technique through a Christian lens. They're salvaging it in the 60s, and they're noticing that all the youth are coming back from India, and down the road there's a meditation center. So they gathered some of the practical wisdoms of sitting, like having a certain time, giving it a little bit of structure to it. So it's and so that's an example of an ancient tradition influencing another ancient tradition and creating a modern expression of a super old, super old idea. Because are there new ideas? Really? I don't know. In some ways, but so that story of centering prayer and how it's centuries old, but also decades old, and couple traditions is like, I love that story as how traditions not only are influenced by each other, I would go so far as to say need each other.
Yeah.
That's a bridge that maybe some might not journey over, but
right.
there it is.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. I think you're right. We're always sort of bringing things in, trying things on, adapting, even whether consciously or unconsciously. Even.
And yet, even in like a progressive or liberal community, there's always a sense of sensing who are we, what is identity, and identity in our human culture is formed by margins.
Right.
And I'm kind of doing this with my hands because they're for some communities they're like this, for others they're very rigid.
Right.
But there is that dynamic between who we are becoming, and that those margins of who we are not. Also.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, it's that tension between the particular and universal that I think that's because I'm very conscious of the fact that I'm a Jewish spiritual leader, right? So that's where I root myself in, and I'm not and even if I give expression to more universal notions or values or ideas or thoughts or questions, they're coming from a Jewish place, because I think that that's where I particularly find my rootedness in what I'm teaching, and because I think it's valuable. But who's in the community and what that means, that's sort of a more expansive, we are a fairly open and inclusive community, and so but we're a Jewish community, so it's like there's pieces of that as well.
And you're coming up to a busy moment.
Yes, right in it.
Yeah, right in it. Yeah. So how does that pull on you as a leader? What's going on right now in the office of Rabbi Seth?
Right now it's like, we're not last year it was, with the pandemic, we knew we would have to adapt and do things differently, and we did, and it was very sweet, and we found new ways of celebrating, expressing, of being together in community. And this year it's I don't know, it's just feeling a bit harder, because I think that we weren't expecting to be in this place again, and this pull about wanting to move past it and be together, but yet also needing to protect and care for each other. And so it's, I don't know where normally this is a time that I could really focus and think about, because it's really the time, it's the most sacred time of our year. It's a time of, we turn the year, it's Day of Atonement, we able to focus on those larger themes of repentance and repair, and where we're going in our lives and as a community. And it's a time that we come together in our largest numbers as a congregation and a community, so there's that sense of renewal, and it just feels very hard this year to get into it, and to really embody that, when so much of the world is uncertain at this point. So I'm sure it'll be fine, it'll be good, and I think that that's part of, as you said, that there's always a continual surprise, and learning, and so take what we learned last year, apply it to this year, and see where we go.
Saved by the bell.
Yeah.
But just
maybe that's the answer.
Just
what we're supposed to do for the high holidays.
I realize, let's not make an assumption real quick. Could you give us a quick the high holiday? Like, we referenced it, but I don't think we. So what is coming up? Actually?
Sure. So coming up is so in about a month's time is the two major Jewish holidays of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, which are respectively the New Year and the Day of Atonement. And they're two holidays that are 10 days apart, that they fall in the fall. The exact Gregorian date shifts every year, because the Jewish calendar is a lunar, solar-based calendar, so there's a bit of adjustment. But it's the most sacred time of the year in the Jewish calendar. It's the overall themes of the period are, as mentioned, this idea of, a new year. So therefore, the idea of being able to look back at where we've been and where we want to be moving forward. There's an element, especially around Yom Kippur, of atonement for sin or transgression, or I like to say just where we want to grow, where we want to expand, and where do we need to make repair in our own lives, within ourselves and our communities, between each other. Where do we need to do seek and grant forgiveness. So it's a very heavy time
Mm-hmm.
of the year, and because they're the most sacred time of the year, that's the time that is very high in observance, right? And people who uh, will, be drawn to observe those holidays um, in great numbers. So it's a time when we come together in our largest numbers as a congregation. And so, so we're coming out. In fact, we just began the month of Elul, which is the month that leads up to the high holidays, which in and of itself has a sense of preparation for the holidays, and that we're meant to use this entire month to kind of get ready. So not just as a rabbi getting ready for all the logistical and technical things about running the services and programs, but emotionally, spiritually, like how are we going to move into this this time frame to make the most of them.
Yeah. Well, thanks for that. I just realized we kind of referenced
Yeah,
it.
no, I appreciate that. I sometimes get into it.
So as we start to wrap up, you mentioned some of the difficulties of like looking ahead, especially like past, September into like this fall or later fall, as we're kind of thinking we might be, on Zoom again. Or one of the questions that I end with typically is, where are you seeing hope right now? What's speaking to you, maybe on a wide lens, globally, regionally, or very locally, personally, even? Like, where are you seeing or experiencing hope right now? And you can define that if you want to. It's an open word, but
yeah.
How are you seeing it, or where are you feeling it?
It depends what day you ask me. It's a great question, because I think that there are definitely times within this past year and a half where I've struggled with that. My own spiritual struggle is struggling with being able to say, like, where's the hope in this moment, because we've done so much damage, as a community, and I think that, or as humans, whether it's to the environment or to each other, and so I sometimes feel like, let's just hit the flood bunny. I know there's something. I don't know. There's like, no, I know. It's not. But I think what hope comes for me, I guess, in this moment, especially as we're leading up to this season, that we can make change. Like, we have that ability if we have the will. Sometimes the hopelessness for me comes from the sense that I don't see people having the will, to do what's necessary. But the fact that we can make change is powerful. And I tend to be someone. I don't know, just in my life, or just the fact that I've been at the same community for a long time, but I tend to have I tend to take the long view. I think that maybe this gets to that earlier question where you asked about mentors, and how I could look back at some of the mentors who I didn't realize at the moment were mentors, but then in years later can see how they were. That I think that change comes. I think we just need to. That time is one of the great elements of change, and that I know that there's a hunger and a desire to turn things around immediately. And in cases of some things like climate, as we've learned, we need to act more quickly than we have. But the ability of humans to adapt and evolve and to change and to ultimately do the right thing is there, despite all the negativity. And so I think we just have the humility to be patient, to wait, to do the work, and knowing that the results might not come for a while, and that it's something that takes. Well, maybe this is good. It's good. I didn't know what I was going to talk about the high holidays, but maybe this is like my high holiday sermon or something. I think in that ability that we do have this ability to create authentic relationship and to do the work, and and that we I think if we have enough humility to know what we don't know, and to be open and willing, and to be patient, then I think change will come. But I don't know. It's hard. It's hard.
It's hard.
It's hard these days.
It is hard these days. Yeah. Well, thank you for that, and we're gonna wrap up with those final words on hope.
I'm not low.
Final words. It's hard. It's hard.
There's no hope.
There's hope. And it's
anyway,
hard.
join us next time.
Yeah. Well, this is Rabbi Seth Goldstein. Thank you for joining us today. This has been Lean In Olympia. Again, check us out on interfaith-works.org for past episodes. Our next episode will be August 24th with Meg Martin, who's Executive Director of Interfaith Works. Thank you for being here. Peace to you all. Thank you, Rabbi Seth, for being here.
Yeah, thanks. I didn't get Meg. I got you, but that's appreciate. No, it's great.
You talked with Meg plenty. Yeah.
No, this was great, Corey. I really it was a fantastic conversation. So thank you.
Appreciate you. Thanks for being here, and thanks to you all. Have a great day.